Hello again, Dave Kites from the OTOW Woodshop. This evening we're making a video about our new finger jig. It's for cutting finger joints, or box joints as they're often called. I'm going to show you all the things we need to do to use it and make box joint. Its jig is limited, and I'll explain what I mean by that as we go through it. It won't cut every size finger, and it won't do everything you can possibly do, but it is a good basic jig, and it can make a lot of boxes with it. So first of all, I'm going to get the dado, and I'm going to get the finger joint jig, and I'm going to bring them over to the saw. We have to put the dado blade on the saw stop, so we'll do that as the first step, and then we'll go into using the finger jig. So what we have on our shelves over there is, of course, the dado. It's a stacked dado. The cartridge that you have to change, the brake cartridge for the saw stop. Instructions for setting up the dado, and the insert for the dado to go in the saw stop. So now, is this too close, Ben? Here, I'll put it over here. I'll put it over here. Get it out of the way for now. We'll get a close look at it when we use it. It has instructions. It has pieces, parts that you will need when we put it on the saw. Okay. So here we go on how to put the dado cartridge in the saw stop, and how to put the dado stack together and mount that in the saw stop. So we take out the insert, we'll raise the blade. We're going to put the dado blade on, so we have to take the blade off anyway, so we'll take it off first. Put the end wrench part on one wrench on the arbor, and the box of the other wrench on the nut, and I like to rest this wrench right here, and then I got two hands to pull on this wrench in case somebody has put it on super tight. And I also don't bang my hands against anything when they're up in the air like this, so that's a nice way to go. If you drop the nut down in the saw stop, there's a door, access door on the left side. It just pops open, and you can reach in there and retrieve your nut, or the reinforcing washer if you happen to drop that either. And the blade comes off. We're not going to put the dado on yet. We're going to change the cartridge. When we do in dados, we don't use this riving knife. So we'll get him out of the way. And now the cartridge that we have to change is right here. This is a cartridge for the 10-inch saw blade. The cartridge, of course, has to be real close to the blade in order to work properly. And so this cartridge is built to come close to a 10-inch diameter saw blade. The dados are 8 inches in diameter, and it's the only size dado you can run on the saw stop, because it's the only size dado cartridge they make is 8 inches. And this cartridge is built different than this one. This one is got an extra inch of aluminum there that reaches up and comes real close to the dado blade when it's properly installed. So 10-inch saw, 8-inch dado. Down here there is a little red handle down in the dark there. Maybe I should get a flashlight. Anyway, down in the dark there's a little red handle. It is in there and it's at about this angle of my finger. You want to turn it so it's up like this. Not straight up, but kind of pointing at you. And then you wiggle it and you pull it sideways and it slides out. So it's in there like that, you rotate it up and you slide it out. Then you grab the cartridge and start wiggling and pulling and it slides off sideways. It's held in there. It's not held in there, it's mounted in there on a big pin here and a little pin down here. And this is the hole, this other hole, pin here, this hole's where he goes, where the lock goes. Okay? So, our dado cartridge is built up bigger here, see? Just so you understand how that works. The holes for the pins are in the same place, here and here, here and here. But see, the extra aluminum there puts it close to the dado blade when we put it on. They go in this way. This slides automatically, lines up and slides into its socket. This is where the electronics make their connections. And we just got a finger hold there. When you put it on, it's a little tricky because you have to get both pins started at the same time. So you have to start this big pin and this little pin at the same time. You can't put one on and then rotate it and slide the other one on. It doesn't work that way. You got to put both on at once. So I usually try to get the top started just a little ways and then reach down and feel my way to getting the bottom pin started, and then I slap it sideways and it goes into place. Not too hard to do. Now I got to put this in, so I got to find the hole, put it in with the handle pointing up. After it's in all the way, turn it till it's 45 degrees down. So I found the hole, put it in, rotate it down. Make sure it's all the way down. The saw is smart enough that if you try to run it with no cartridge, it won't run. If you put the cartridge in and you put the pin in and you don't lock it, it won't run. It won't run till the cartridge is in, the pin is in, and the pin is turned down and locked. Then the saw will run. Okay, so we got the cartridge in, that was good. Now we have to make our stack. So what we have in the case is we have the two side blades and we have the chippers, as they're called, these other pieces that we're going to stack up to make the width of dado that we want. And then there's some shims here that you can fine adjust the width of that cutting stack if you need to. Now, we want, you have to know in advance, I'm going to make 5/16 of an inch wide fingers in my finger joint. So I need 5/16 of an inch wide slots in my finger joint. This makes the slots. So we need to make the stack dado do 5/16 of an inch. When you take the outside blade, one of them, put the print on the outside of the stack, and the other one, the print goes on the outside of the stack. These two together, according to the chart, tells you here how to stack up, which ones to put together to get the right stack. These two alone are 1/4 of an inch. So I need to find the 1/16 of an inch chipper, and it just happens to be right on the top. It's right there, they're marked. It says 1/16 of an inch. 4 legs. So to get 5/16 stack, we take this 1/4, add a 1/16, and here's our stack. Now, what you want to do is make this stack so that the teeth, I want you to see that close. So the teeth aren't touching each other. And there's not much room to do that because there's only this much space. Let me make it more clear. There's only this much space in between this guy's teeth. So you want this guy to be in between there. Well, there you go. Now, in addition, you want this guy to be in between this guy's teeth. So, if you did that, now the problem is, these two are almost touching. The outside blade teeth are almost touching. Not quite. So you could do that. I like to offset them a little bit if I can. So, I get it approximately right, and I'll try to put it on here in the right direction so that, just like a saw, the teeth are coming towards you. And I put them in there, and I wiggle them on. Put my washer on, put my nut on. Oh, the saw is a right-hand thread, by the way. Some saws are left-hand, but this is a right-hand. So it works like an ordinary screw. Now I can rotate it around to where one of my chippers is, and now I can easily, I got a little bit of snug on here, so I can easily step these teeth so none of them are right next to each other. It's not sideways next to each other in there. And I can put my end wrench on here, my box wrench on here, and that's enough. Don't use a riving knife with the dado. Lower it down. Put the insert in. Remember, these little heads of these guys go under the heads of these guys. So you can't plunk it on top. You got to slide it underneath. So those heads go under the other heads, and then just put the bail down here, and you've done it. If you put things back in here, be sure to put these on, otherwise when you lift up this side, these will dump out. Don't ever lift up this side because there's nothing holding these shims in, and they'll all dump out. You know what I'm saying? If you pick this up and try to close it, it's all going to dump out. So you always lift this side. I just like to get things out of the way. So put your saw blade up in the rack, put your cartridge up on the shelf. They'll be there for you when you get done. And so now we've installed that. And we can, double check, he does come up through there okay. I tightened him, everything's fine. Oh, by the way, when I started, I turned the main power switch off for the saw. I don't unplug the saw. There is a place you can do it, but it's hard to get at, and you don't really need to. Turn this power switch off. It's almost impossible to run the saw without you knowing it. Somebody else would have to come up here, turn the power on, wait for it to boot, and then pull out the blade handle, and then it might run. Except if you've got it apart, it ain't got enough parts in there, and it knows it, and it ain't going to run anyway. So it has to be all together, and you're in the process of lowering it down, and then somebody comes and turns power on, waits 10 seconds for it to boot, and then pulls out the blade. And they're going to do all that while you're here like this? No, it isn't going to happen, okay? So just turn off the power switch. Pretty safe operation. Now we're ready to work with the finger joint jig. This is the way it would come off the shelf with this stuff on it and instructions, okay? So these are the stops. We're going to put them in here to limit the travel of the jig. I'll explain more later. These are what I'm calling guide boards. They have different size fingers. This one is 3/8, 5/16, quarter, and this one's a half that's mounted on the jig right now. Well, I don't want the half. I want to do 5/16. Remember when I did the dado? That's what we did. We put 5/16 in there. So here's how you change out the guide board on the jig. Well, let's do a little something else first. The parts of the jig. This is the base part of the sled. This is a guide board. This is the adjustment gauge. This gauge right here is going to tell you where your finger is left and right relative to the dado slot. This is the adjustment mechanism. This is the adjustment block of the adjustment mechanism. And these are the T-bolts that hold the guide board to the fence of the sled. This is the fence of the sled. This is a blade housing, so when you push the sled across and you're done cutting, the dado blade is not exposed out in the back here, so you can't bump it with your hand. And the reason we have the stops in the slots is so you don't push it and run the dado blade through the blade housing. Don't want you to saw up the blade housing. So boom, the sled's going to stop when it's done cutting. So those are the basic parts. The base, the finger. This is called the jig finger, because there'll be fingers on your pieces when we cut some, so don't get mixed up. This is the jig finger. It's part of the jig. Guide block, adjustment gauge, adjustment mechanism, adjustment block, T-bolts, blade house. Okay. Other guide boards of different size fingers. Okay. So I want to take off the 1/2" one. There is a machine screw right here, not a wood screw, but a machine screw, because there's an insert, a metal insert in the guide block that it screws into. So it is holding this guide block, part of the mechanism, holding that firmly in the guide board, so that when you turn the little adjustment knob, the guide board won't have any play in it. It'll just move. So we take out the screw. We have to take these completely off. Just get the knobs off. Push the T-bolts through the guide board. The washers fall off on the back. And now the guide board comes off. This guy, there's one on each guide board. He's what activates the pointer. See that? He pushes right here and makes the pointer go this way and that way as the guide board goes back and forth. Okay? So there's that. Now the 5/16 is this one right here. We're going to install this. We're going to take the indicator and hold it way over here to the left so we can put this guy in there without interference. And we're going to put that on there. And I got a little problem here. You see, this guy is too far this way, even with the indicator all the way over here, and I can't get it on this place and here at the same time. That's okay. Just move the mechanism down this way a bit. And now I can get him on at the same time that he'll go in there, and you see now he's holding the indicator in the right position. Get the block into the slot, the adjustment mechanism block into the guide board slot, and then hand insert the machine screw. We don't want to mess up the threads. And you'll go in most of the way without actually screwing, and then tighten them up. This is the most tedious part, but it makes a big difference because it really makes the mechanism tight, not much play in it. The width of the finger is got to be very precise, very close to the width of the slot. Otherwise you have a sloppy joint, or you have a joint that won't go together. So on this jig here, I added this gauge. Most of the time, simple finger joint jigs require trial and error to get the finger size to match the slot very closely. Very closely, we're talking 5 to 10 thousandths of an inch. Makes a difference, noticeable difference, in the fit of the joints. On this gauge, each one of these marks is about 8 thousandths of an inch. So you can adjust this, and we're going to do that in a little while, but anyway, for now, I got the block on, I left these a little loose, I tightened that up, I moved it so that my pointer is right on the middle, pointing right in the middle. Then I'm going to snug these up, and I put my guide board on. Okay? These we just get out of the way. Now I want to talk about the pieces that you're going to make your box or whatever your item is out of. I'm going to get my pieces. So these are the pieces. They're just crude pieces. This isn't a fancy project. This is just a demo on how to use the jig. So there's some pieces, but your project pieces need to be the same size. Now 2 of these are close and the other 2 are close. There's really 2 pairs here, okay? So, but they're all the same thickness, that's very important, and they're all the same joint length. If I'm going to put this box together this way, those 2 as sides and these 2 as ends, okay? Then I need to know how pieces are going to be put together so that I know how to cut them. Because 2 of these pieces are going to be finger pieces and 2 of them are going to be slot pieces. And that means 2 of the pieces are going to start with a finger on the top, and because of the design that we use in this method, a finger on the bottom. And the other sides are going to start with slots at the top and slots on the bottom. So we're going to mark these pieces so that we know how they're supposed to go together and which 2 are what. And so I'm going to just arbitrarily, I can make either this be the finger piece or this be the finger piece, doesn't matter. But I'm going to make that a finger piece and the opposite side is a finger piece. Now I'm going to make these 2 then are slot pieces. Slot, slot. When we cut the fingers, we're going to start at one edge of this board, and we're going to cut fingers and slots, or we're going to cut slots. We're not going to, well, we cut them together anyway. We're going to cut it down this edge. So that's the joint edge. That's going to be the joint. This is the non-joint edge, okay? All the joint edges have to be the same height. I want to start cutting each piece from the same edge so I can match them up when I get done, because it may not come out even down at the bottom. I may have a partial finger or a partial slot at the end here unless I've measured this very carefully, and this comes out to be very precisely the right. If everything was exactly 5/16, then I could come out even and have a full size finger or slot down at the bottom at the end of the cutting. But that isn't really the way it works. You know, you can't measure it that close. So this one at the bottom is going to be a little different than all the rest. So you can't take some of those bottom ones and expect it to match with the top ones. So we have to keep these oriented right side up all the time. So to do that, I'm going to make a line for the joint edge, both joint edges there, and I'm going to make this the top. Well, I'm going to say begin. This is where I'm going to begin cutting. I put a B there, okay? Same thing, joint edge, beginning, joint, beginning, joint, beginning. Okay, so now my parts are marked. All same size. We got good pieces. So those are the pieces parts. Now, even though we have all this fine adjustment and the indicator and all that, and we were going to be really intelligent about how we set this up to start, the first time we cut may not be set exactly right. So you've got to have some test pieces. Your test pieces need to be the same thickness as your stock for your project, but they don't have to be the same size. If they are, good, you might come out with, you know, 2 projects instead of 1 if it comes out right the first time. But they just need to be big enough, but they need to be the right thickness, but the right other size, so that you can cut 3 or 4 fingers and grooves on an edge and then see how they fit together. That's what we have to do. So we have to have some more of this material of that exact thickness to do that. I don't have any. I'm going to use this and say that it's a test piece, okay? And in real life, it would not be one of my product pieces, okay? So I apologize if that's confusing, but you need test pieces to start with. They don't have to be the same size as the product, except for the thickness has to be the same. Okay. So now we've got the right board mounted on here. We've got the dado set. We've got our pieces marked. Now we're getting ready to put the jig on the saw. And the first thing we want to do is put these guys in. These are just, like I said, stops. Now they have to slide in from the end because they're the T-shaped channel, aluminum channel is T-shaped to fit in the wide part of the slot so they don't lift up. So we have to put them in there. Run them all the way back here. Put the words on the inside. Line the back edge up here. Doesn't have to be exact. Just close. Okay. Now on that saw stop, number 1 saw stop down the other end of the shop, I know that this won't go in, and it won't go in here either. The regular 3/4 part of a miter slide will go into our groove here, but not these T-shaped guys. It's just not lined up well enough. So we have to start at this end of the table and run it in this way and do this. So you have to put these on, before you plop the jig into the miter slots. The jig is built with 2 tracks, 2 slides to run in the 2 miter slots. Obviously that's the front. This is the blade housing in the back, and he falls in. Now you see he's limited, so even if this dado is up high, it's not going to come out the back of the sled. If I could keep going, I could expose it here, and I don't want to do that. So now we have the stops in place, the jig is on the saw, got the right board in here, got the right dado width set, got our pieces all the same size and thickness and marked. So we're ready to start. So everything is ready to get going. So we're going to raise the blade up, and now we're going to set the height of the blade equal to the thickness of the stock. And this is the easy way to do it. Just put it in there. Rotate this to be sure you've got the feel in the blade right at the top of its rotation. And I like to, and I wrote in the instructions, to leave the blade just a little bit higher than the stock. That will make your fingers stick out when you put the joint together. I'm going to exaggerate. They're going to stick out like that. That's okay. It's going to stick out just a teeny bit. You can sand that off. If your fingers don't stick out at all, if they're recessed inside the slot, there's no way to make the joint smooth except to sand away the whole side of the piece. And that's very hard. That'll become more apparent when we get there. But for now, just set the blade just a little bit above the thickness of the stock. So your fingers will be a little bit long. Okay, so once he's set, I suggest lock the blade with the knob on the elevation adjustment of the saw stop. Okay. So now we've done that. Now we're going to start cutting. This is a finger piece. You have to start with a finger piece. Can't start with a slot piece. So we start with the finger piece. What we want to know is, let me explain what we're doing here. The dado, the concept is the dado is cutting the slots. So all the slots are going to be the width of the dado, whatever you set. All the slots. Every time you cut it, it never changes. What changes is the size, the width of the fingers that we cut. Because we're going to put this piece of wood here, and when we cut it, push it through, the wood between the jig finger and the edge of the dado blade is left, and that's the finger, and that's the width of the finger. So we're going to start by cutting a finger, but what we want to be sure of is that this distance here between the side of the finger and the side of the dado blade, which is going to be the width of the finger, that is 5/16 of an inch, or as close to it as we can get. And the way to do that is either to take a rule like this, and you can push this up to here where there's a tooth that's about a tooth on this side, on this edge, that's edge is close to, and then you want to measure to the side, this side of the finger, like that. And if I do that very carefully, I can see this is very close to 5/16 right now. Another way to do that is with a gauge block. And we have a set of gauge blocks. One of our sets of gauge blocks doesn't have a 5/16, but this set, our other set, does have a 5/16 block. The other one has an 1/8 inch block and a 3/16 inch block. So 3/16 and 2/16 is, 5/16. But this one has a 5/16 block, which we can put in here. And then we can adjust this until it matches that. I had the 1/4 inch block. See, now that one is looking good. And so now with my fine adjustment and these loose, I can move this guide board back and forth until that finger is pulling that gauge block just up against the dado blade tooth. Because I've rotated this till a tooth of the dado blade is down there on the side of the gauge block. So now it's there. So it looks to me like if I set this right in the middle, which isn't a surprise and I'll tell you why, but if I set this pointer right on that middle point and then tighten these up and see that it doesn't move, okay, that's distance now where the finger's going to be is very close to 5/16 of an inch. It's not a surprise that the pointer ended up in the middle, because when I put these pieces on here, I had the gauge block in there and I had this thing clamped in and everything, so that I did what I just did now, I did then before this piece was on there, and I put this piece on so that the pointer would be pointing at the middle when you got it close. So it does. So it points near the middle. Okay. So there you go. So now we've got our approximate setting. I'll call it approximate, but I'll bet it's going to be very close. Got our approximate setting set. Now we are really ready to cut the first piece, and it's going to be a finger piece. And I'm going to start at the beginning edge. I'm not going to start at this edge. I'm going to start at this edge, and I'm going to cut on this. Okay, I'm not going to cut on this edge. Beginning, this edge. There you go. Put him there. I hold him moderate pressure up against the finger, the jig finger, and of course down on here, and of course up against the fence. Now, when I cut this, there's a big hole behind here in the guide board, and so this wood can splinter out from here, just like it does on a table saw or a router bit. When it comes to the exit, the wood gets really thin, gets so thin that it can no longer be stiff enough to cut. Instead, it breaks, and that's what splintering out is. So that can happen here. So if you want to, you can take another piece of wood, probably wood, like 5mm plywood or something inexpensive but of uniform thickness, and put it behind the piece and move it along with the piece as you make all the cuts, and each cut will be backed up by that other piece of wood, and you won't get any splintering out in your product piece. Okay? You simply, now if you do that, as it says in the instructions, you want to be sure that that sacrificial piece is tall enough in this direction, tall enough so that you don't have a tendency to do this. In other words, if I had this was my sacrificial piece and it was only that tall, and I put that there, how the heck am I going to hold this thing up straight? I'm not going to do it. It's got to be tall enough so that it comes almost as high as the fence, so then I can hold it flat against the fence. Okay? So, a tall piece of sacrificial. It takes a lot of sacrificial stuff by the time you get done, because you got to cut this edge, this edge, this edge, this edge, this edge, this edge, this edge. Eight times the length of this is the amount of sacrificial wood you need for one set. Some people use a sacrificial piece, and once they cut it, they leave it there. It's not bad because every cut is coming through the same place pretty darn close. So it's backing up the wood pretty close to where the cut's coming through, even if it's used repeatedly. But if you really want to be a perfectionist about it, you'll move it every time. So, one more time. We're going to begin here. We're going to cut along this edge. We're going to cut one, move it, move it, move it, move it. We're going to cut along this edge. And we're going to start with the finger piece. And we're going to hold it right there. I'm not going to use any backup material. I'm just going to cut this. And we're going to make our first cut. We're only cutting slots, but it's leaving fingers behind. So we're really doing them both at once. Turn on my saw, wait for it to boot. When you do this, you want to hold this, obviously, nice tight against the fence here and go at a medium slow pace past the cutter. And when I get to the other side and hit my stops, I'm going to remove the piece before I retrieve the sled. I got to take the piece away anyway to put them up on top of the finger for the next cut. So I'm going to move them anyway. I take them away because if he's here and I'm holding them here and I come back, and if I do something like let go of it and it drifts over this way a little bit as I'm coming back past the blade, I'm going to ruin my slot. So I don't want to do that. So I'm going to finish the cut, take this away, then retrieve it, put them over the finger, make the next one, and so on. All right? So here we go. Number 2. So I purposely left it in there and dragged it back across the blade on the second slot. And when we match up here, we'll see if we see any difference in the fit. That slot, I heard it hit it, so it's some amount bigger than the other slots, but maybe not enough to matter. We'll find out. So if this is a test piece, that's enough to cut, okay, of a finger piece. Now we need a test slot piece. Okay, same deal. Cut edge. And this is the end I want to begin at. How am I going to get started? I'm going to put this finger piece over here and then bring this up against it. And you see that makes the first cut in this piece be a slot. I'm going to take this corner right out of there, okay? And it's spaced right because this finger is right, and he's in the right position because this slot is over the finger, the jig finger, and there you go. So this is going to be right. Cut edge, beginning, cut edge, beginning, okay. Now, I didn't cut all the way down here so they won't go together with the B and the B on the same side, like I'm supposed to do. So how am I going to test it? I'm just going to turn this one over. All we want to test here is that the fingers fit in the slots. And they do. So our jig is really pretty accurate. You get this pointer just on the center pointer here for this 5/16 guy, and he's going to be very close to right. This is a nice fit. It is snug enough that it would, well, this is pretty heavy wood, so it won't quite hold it, but it is decent. Yeah, now we got to check, as Ben just reminded me, if we put this here and we pound these down, and we have to snug this up and see if our fingers stick out or are in. And what I'm feeling here is the fingers, yes, they're flush. So the little bit extra that I put on there by just doing my feel, lucky I did that, because otherwise the fingers would have been short. But right now they're very close to right. Just a little fine sanding on this is going to make that look really smooth and uniform. Okay, so I knew the jig was pretty accurate, so I didn't really worry too much about not having test pieces. I haven't verified all the other three. They're probably going to be pretty close. But this did make a decent size finger to fit that 5/16 slot right off the bat. So in real life, those would be the test pieces. You'd now set those aside, take your production pieces, and do what we did with the test pieces. You'd start with a finger on the B end along the joint here. You would put this right here, cut that slot over there, and then just keep going until you got to the end. Now I'm going to do that. I'm going to go to the end. I'm going to see how even I came out here. I don't remember now. I made these pieces up a while back, and I've forgotten whether I was doing 5/16 or if I was doing 3/8 or what I was doing here. So I don't know where it's going to come out, but we'll find out here in a minute, because I'll finish cutting this one edge of this finger piece. Okay. Here we go. So what I can see is that my slot, my last slot, is a little bit shallow, because this pin, or this finger, is up above. I'll get it in there. This finger is up above this level by a little bit, because this slot, there wasn't enough wood here for this slot to be full depth. So that's why we want, if I cut this slot piece now, I'm going to do that. I'll cut this slot piece, and we'll see the difference between putting them together B to B and not B to B. Yeah, let's cut this one. is up. The B is up. Okay, there's a B at the top. And there's a B at the top. So these will go together and they should match up pretty well. Look at that. Can't ask for much better. And down at the bottom they match up pretty well. And you saw the fingers. Oh yeah, let's talk about that a minute. The fingers. You see they're, if I push on it, I can get them. They're sticking out now, just a tiny bit, okay? If they were too short, it is one of the few things you can correct. If it's too short, you can recut these pieces after raising this just a little bit more, okay? Nothing positionally up or down is changing. The width of the slot's not changing. The width of the finger's not changing. The width of the board's not changing. All that's changing is you're making a deeper cut. And that'll let the fingers stick out so you could get them flush or sand them off. Okay? So that is one of the few things that you can correct if your joint didn't fit together right. If it's just that the fingers are too short, you just put everything back on here and raise this up just a smidgen, and then cut all of the slots again, and now the slots will be deep enough, and the fingers will be long enough, and the slots deep enough, so that they'll stick out. Okay? If you put it together upside down, it's not going to line up. I guess I don't have to prove that to you, but I'll turn this one over. Okay. In the design, you may want to start and end with a finger on this piece, and that's what the instructions are written for, called symmetrical. Okay, symmetrical. This one would start and end with a slot. So these are too big to be symmetrical. Okay? If they were symmetrical, you'd still want to mark the B and the T's, the B's, and get them together, because the last one may be just a little bit different. When they're not symmetrical, then they won't go together. So, there you go. Now, what didn't we leave out? Okay. When you're cutting, most guys will cut the fingers and then they'll flip it over and cut the other side. Well, you got to start with the B, so he'll go here. And then he'll do the other finger one. Then he'll use one finger one to put on like that, remember? And we start with the slot guy then with the B edge here. We'd start his other edge here, and we'd cut him, and then cut the other one. If you switch back and forth between slots and fingers, might be a little confusing. You got enough to keep track of with the cut edge and the starting edge, in addition to fingers and slots, boards. If they didn't come out a nice joint, when you adjust here, you loosen these, and 8/1000ths between to the next mark, that's a plenty. I would probably, it depends on what it looks like. It's probably not going to be very far off, so you're going to want to move it just a part of like that much. One division is plenty, and then run a couple test pieces and see how that goes. On this indicator, if it goes this way, then that means the board's going this way. That means the gap here, the finger width, is getting smaller. And if the pointer goes this way, the finger's going away from the blade and it's getting wider. So that's the way that works. All that's written down in these multi-page instructions, and they will be available with the jig up on the shelf. That's it. Basic jig, Only 4 different size fingers available, but it's quick and it works pretty good. Okay, so there is a quicker way to make the cuts, but it requires a little more control, thinking. I'm going to show you what it is. You can cut a finger and a slot piece at the same time, almost. You start out the same way. We're going to be at the beginning end, along the cut edge, we're going to cut a finger. All right? So I cut one finger, I turn the board around, put the and I put the slot, I cut one slot and I put that over the finger. I take a slot board, this is a finger board, this is a slot board. Take a slot board now, put it here, and I'm going to make one slot cut. So now I've got one slot cut and one finger cut in the finger board, one slot cut in the slot board. Of course, there's one slot in the finger board too. I'm going to turn it back around to where I started, and I'm going to take this on the slot board and put that over the finger and line my 2 boards up so they're both on the finger. This is the slot, this is the finger board. They're offset, yes, by 1 finger. But now I can cut both boards at once. Tolerances seem to have stacked up, but you can see that they will fit together. Remember when I said you'd only move it 1 mark? I did move it 1 mark, and I left it moved 1 mark, and that's why it doesn't fit as good as it did before. So 1 mark on here is important. So we're going to go back to the center. Now, another unfortunate thing is you can't recut these. If you make the adjustment and try to recut these, it doesn't work out at all. Because what happens is the slots are all the same size, but the slots the fingers are different. So the first slot's in the same place. Second slot, though, is further over than it was the first time you cut it. Okay, so if the slot's further over, then the pin isn't going to match anymore, and so you end up with a mess. It just doesn't work out. So you can't do that. But that's why this doesn't fit like it did before, because the gauge was one line off. So now we know how much one line off does. I can beat that together, but pounding it together is not really what you want to do. If you pound too much, you'll break fingers and you'll splinter wood, and it won't be good. So that explains it all. The jig is still sound and still works right. So, but that is a little quicker way, a lot quicker way. You cut two edges at once if you do that.